Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on risk management and financial continuity. My name is Kim Kellaway and I'm Head of Clients and Markets at Mann, Judd, and I will be your moderator. Our presenters today are Aaron Bailey, Chief Information Security Officer at The Missing Link, and Nicholas Guest, Partner Corporate Advisory in Mann, Judd. Our presentation today will cover off on the current challenges, the financial continuity, designing for future success, and the state of cybersecurity. I'd now like to hand it over to Nicholas Guest to present our financial continuity. To you, Nick.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our presentation this morning. As Kim mentioned, we're going to focus on some areas that we believe are very relevant and appropriate for all organisations to be considering at the moment. The last 6 months, and it's been over 6 months now, has been an extraordinarily challenging time for a large number of businesses and organisations in the Australian economy and globally. We've been very fortunate as we stand at the moment here in New South Wales and the rest of Australia, including Victoria, starting to ease out of their lockdowns. But we do perceive that will be still some challenges facing the economy for quite a period of time. This is particularly relevant as detailed within the recent federal budget and their view on the outlook for the next 12 months or so. Some of the challenges we see in the shorter term come with the wind back of some of the government incentives and other benefits that have been provided to organisations to help them through this extraordinarily challenging time. The JobKeeper program has been hugely successful in helping a lot of organisations with the subsidies to wages and salaries. The JobKeeper programs have wound back for some organisations from the end of September, with other organisations continue to ease with December 20, the end of December this year, and then in the first quarter of 2021 at the end of March. Likewise, many organisations have benefited from rental relief from the Landlord Code of Conduct, and again these measures are starting to ease, which may require organisations to revert back to closer to their full rental lease payments. Likewise, banks and financial institutions came to the aid of a large number of organisations, providing some form of relief or extension to facilities, which has been hugely beneficial in keeping organisations sustainable and continuing to trade in the current period. But likewise, they're going to start to revert back to normal payment plans. Recognising all these challenges, that the government maybe wisely early on in the piece extended some relief to directors in relation to the insolvent trading, which allowed directors to continue to trade in circumstances which may, under the previous regime, have indicated there could be risks or issues with insolvency. Those reliefs continue until 31 December 2020, after which time all directors in the current framework will revert back to having personal liability for any debts that are incurred while the business trades, if it trades while insolvent. So that's something really to be mindful of. Likewise, with continued access to finance may or may not be available. With all these measures, it's important to consider what the impact are or may be on our own organisations, but also our counterparty risks. So our clients, our customers, our suppliers, those that we engage with. What are those impacts going to be on these organisations and their potential access to cash flow while these measures start to wind back? Next slide, please. There's also challenges for organisations. We're starting to see some potential issues in the labour market where while we're suffering from employment in some sectors, particularly those where we're exposed to hospitality and sectors of the tourism. There's also facing skill shortages in industries which were largely reliant or had got quite exposure to international candidates in an international workforce. And being able to get those skilled labour into Australia could be a challenge for a period of time. And from a huge number of other organisations, how and where we work presents challenges. And while when we start to phase out of our sort of restrictive movements and people can start to move around more, how and where are people going to work, and what is business as usual? Likely to be continued restrictions on international travel, and this is going to not only impact on our tourism and hospitality industries, but also a large number of businesses and organisations that relied on trade with international counterparties. We've seen overnight that parts of Europe have announced additional lockdowns, with Germany and France having a hard lockdown for a period of time. So it's quite possible that there may be continued restrictions on international travel for most of calendar year 2021. And so how's that going to impact on our organisations? And just responding to these risk of rolling lockdowns, the uncertainty around how we can operate, how people can access our premises, how can our staff engage, really is going to have quite significant impacts on our historic operating models. And really, it gives us rise to consider, are our business systems and processes going to allow organisations to flourish in a new normal? Like always, with uncertainty brings opportunity. So I think it's really important for organisations, once we've start to navigate a path through our immediate challenges, to think about what we will do and what's our strategic objectives for the longer term. Next slide, please. So navigating our path, and this really considers our immediate challenges of our organisations. And the first step for any analysis is to make sure our house is in order, that we've got good quality financial information that's available to us, that's going to support our good decision making. This is critically important, we believe, at all times, but particularly in times of uncertainty. Having access to that good quality information enables those informed decisions, and we can make actions and take advantage of and respond to risks and opportunities in a timely manner. Everybody should still continue to assess their situation and access any incentives and support that may be available to them. The JobKeeper stimulus and a range of other stimulus measures are still able to be accessed by certain organisations. If it's available to you, we encourage everyone to ensure that they can take advantage of those stimulus measures. Make sure you're using your quality information to engage with your stakeholders. If you perceive some risks within your finance facilities or with landlords or customers or suppliers, act early, start the conversations, engage with your advisors, and take early action. That's often going to be the best course of action. Assess the likely outcome for your business. On the next slide, we run through some where we sort of categorise businesses as potentially being in a good, uncertain or troubled state. And there may be different courses of action depending on where you assess your business and potentially some of your counterparties to be sitting. And the next stage of navigating this path is really to explore and determine the path forward. What are your options? Discuss them, formulate them with your key stakeholders, document them, and then move forward. But it is the type of action that we're suggesting needs to be continually reviewed, and in much shorter time frames than historically have been explored. Next. So as I mentioned, we talk here about three broad categories of where businesses may be sitting in the current market, and this is something that's quite unique and not necessarily experienced in previous economic cycles, just due to this widespread impacts of the pandemic. We're seeing some organisations really sitting in this good category. They're profitable, they're doing well. They may have been able to take advantage quickly of some market forces, maybe growing and expanding. Some examples are some of the sort of the pivot towards retail, online retail in particular, where we've seen historic bricks and mortar retail suffering, but some online platforms really expanding and quite quickly. Likewise with some service offerings in that area. So there are areas of the economy that really have done quite well in the current environment. It's a large number of organisations that sit in this uncertain category. They're really needing to start to consider how can we navigate an immediate path, but how are we going to start pivoting to take advantage of the longer term new world and move into that good category. These organisations, we're suggesting, need to start considering potential strategic challenges to their cost base, and the way their service delivery models. How are they going to interact with their customers and suppliers? How are they going to take advantage of or alter their business model to move forward? One thing to be really cautious of here, and we're seeing some examples of it, is where organisations may be taking on new work to get some cash flow into the door, but they might be doing that at margins which are may not be sustainable. So is that going to be a long-term strategies? Really something to be important, to be considered. There may well be, over the next 3 months, a number of businesses going to be in this troubled section where they really need to review and understand their viability. With a wind down of measures such as the JobKeeper, we really may see some organisations that may not be viable, particularly if their customer base and the historic business models are no longer there or may not be there for the near term. If organisations are foreseeing this kind of position, we really do encourage them to start to engage early with advisors to be able to take advantage of some of the protection measures, particularly under the Corporations Act and insolvency measures, so that they don't find themselves being forced into an insolvency action with little option. So with that framework, we encourage you really to consider your own organisation, but also your counterparties and those you interact with. So what to do immediately? Build a plan. This is critically important. Hopefully many businesses have been already have this in place, and this is just a refresh. We really do recommend a 13-week rolling forecast. Look at your cash flow, have some visibility, get in the practice of engaging with everybody internally within your business to get some visibility over those forward cash projections. Critically important, I think, as we stand now, the December-January trading period has historically been a challenge for a number of organisations as we slow down and potentially take leave and maybe have historic sort of closures to organisations, which can put a drain on cash flow. What's that going to look like in this current market? So I encourage everyone to really have a strong look at their forecasts out to 31 December and beyond. Think differently. This is really a critical aspect. Can we use this for volatility and disruption to look at optimising our internal systems and processes? Are there some new risks that might be exposed to our businesses or organisations exposed to? Likewise, as opportunities, can we take advantage of those? Step 4, as we say, engage with your stakeholders, whether that be your staff, your advisors, your banks, your customers. Just have those open and honest conversations and factor that into your plan to move forward. And obviously at number 5, be safe. We really do encourage everyone to continue to be very mindful of the COVID restrictions. Make sure our customers, our staff, and everyone we engage with can do so in a safe manner. Next step will be to think beyond our short term. So once we've navigated a plan to get through any sort of immediate challenges, really encouraging everyone to step back and look at how do we design for future success. And this may be where it is the opportunity to think differently, think about our organisation. Can we change the way we work? And one of the core aspects and core ways to start this process is to complete a business diagnostic, to look through across your organisation. What are your core functions and services? Engage with all the relevant stakeholders internally and start to design a strategic roadmap for the future. This would be identifying the key opportunities and risks. We're very fortunate to have Aaron joining us shortly. And one of the key risks that we're seeing become more and more prevalent is the cyber risks. And cyber risks have been present and relevant for quite a number of years, but in these periods of disruption, it becomes even more critical. Create and refine a strategic plan with actionable KPIs. This is hugely important. For success, we think the plans must be documented, they must get the buy-in of all stakeholders, and there must be some actionable KPIs so we can monitor and measure our success in the future. And implementing systems to capture key data and report that data is really critical as well. And again, it may be something which with changes in work practices and some of the learnings that organisations have experienced over the recent periods, there may be some aspects there that are really useful to take away and build into our organisations for the future. One of those is in terms of use of information, and we're hearing from a number of organisations who have simplified their reporting structures and the information flows internally with a focus on quality information over quantity, using dashboards and the like to make sure that information which is really meaningful to decision makers is captured in a timely manner and distributed to those that need it so it can be actioned. So that's an area which may present a lot of opportunities for organisations to get buy-in across their teams. Next, please. As I mentioned, cybersecurity is a huge focus for and should be a focus for all organisations. HOB International have just released a cybersecurity report, which is being gathered from insights from a number of senior IT professionals, and it makes for an interesting and insightful read. So the links to that will be circulated with the slides. It's now time to introduce Aaron Bailey from The Missing Link. The Missing Link are a strategic partner of HLB. We've had the opportunity to work closely with The Missing Link, both assisting us internally, but also with our clients. Aaron is the Chief Information Security Officer, and he is very well placed to talk to us about cybersecurity. So thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Nicholas. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time today as well. I'm going to run through a bit of a state of the cybersecurity with a strong focus domestically, what's going on in Australia, here in our country. And I'm also going to run you through a bit of a timeline of the anatomy of an attack, an actual cyber incident that occurred for one of our clients recently, and the incident response that we ran for them, and how that unfolded as well. So just a quick bit about myself. I've been doing cybersecurity and nothing but for my entire career. As you can see, while I have a little bit of a high risk appetite in terms of my own hobbies, really my passion is about reducing risk for businesses and clients. And I'm now lucky enough to be the CISO for The Missing Link where I've been able to help build and grow a multi-award winning business. Just a quick bit about ourselves. We've been around for 23 plus years. We have an infrastructure division, a security division, and our newest division is automation as well, about robotic process automation. We have over 130 staff across 5 states and territories across Australia. We've won lots and lots of awards, and we've worked with lots of different clients and specifically done lots of security assessments, and we do them continuously every single year, and I'll explain a few of those in a moment. And we work with lots of different global and local vendors to be able to find the best of breed options for our clients to enhance their cyber resilience. We've also been working with HLB, Mann, Judd for just over 4 years now. We work with each other in terms of providing services to each other, but we also work with each other in terms of referring each other and our specialist skills to our individual clients as well. We've won too many awards to talk about specifically, but there's just a couple I wanted to cover here. We made it into the Australian Financial Review's Fast 100 twice. So that's actually an award across all industries in Australia, and the CRN Fast 50 as well. So that's the channel reseller news. It's more focused on the IT industry, but we've actually been in the CRN Fast 50 as a group no less than 7 times since it started in 2009, and effectively that puts us in the top 1% of all companies that have ever appeared in that list. So what I'm going to do now is just take you through some recent high-profile cybersecurity incidents, and you'll notice that they do fall into some very discrete categories. In June of 2019, you may have heard about the Australian National University hack. There was quite a bit of information technically released about this. 19 years of data was potentially breached. Basically, all of the data that they amassed and kept, things like names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, emails, tax file numbers, bank account details, and even passports and student academic records as well. You'll notice that quite often attribution is quite difficult. Attribution is really just the act of identifying who the attackers are, who the hackers are. In this case, it was suspected Chinese-based hackers. I don't think it was ever proven, although we do know that Chinese-based hackers broke into ANU the previous year as well and completely compromised the network, although seemingly unrelated with this particular hack. More recently, in May of 2020, BlueScope Steel suffered a ransomware event that disrupted their systems. It impacted them being able to produce and manufacture what they do in their core business. There was no actual evidence that any personal information was compromised or stolen, and therefore, it's unknown whether or not any actual records were impacted, but their business certainly was. You may have heard about Service New South Wales. So this was actually an email compromise attack in May this year. Email compromise, effectively an attacker being able to compromise an email account within your corporate environment. In this case, it impacted 47 staff members. And so all we know in terms of records is 47 email accounts were actually compromised. Service New South Wales released a statement at the time that the data that was illegally accessed was actually stored in emails as attachments, etc., or text within those emails. And limited to those accounts, although there was actually no disclosure to the public in terms of how many citizens' information was actually part of that breach. In June of this year, we saw Lion suffer a massive ransomware attack as well, that basically resulted in limited visibility and limited operations of their business. It did affect, and they suffered disruption to customers and suppliers as well as part of that. And most recently, Transport for New South Wales. This one's actually a bit of a different category. It falls under the era of human error, effectively. Over 100,000 records were effectively left exposed due to a misconfiguration of Amazon Web Services and a storage instance that they had. The S3 bucket was basically found as part of an investigation into another data breach. So this wasn't necessarily a hack. They were investigating something else, and they found a misconfiguration that had actually exposed a whole bunch of personally identifiable information, including things like phone numbers, addresses, and birth dates as well. So in Australia, we have the Privacy Act, and the Privacy Act requires companies to actually notify the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, or the OAIC, if they believe that they've suffered a data breach that affects personal information. I've given some examples of what that could be, but basically it's information that could identify an individual, their home address, obviously tax file number, driver's license, all those sorts of things, all cater as that. And I'm just going to take you through, so they actually release reports quarterly on the number of incidents that have been notified to them with a bit of information around that. So I'm going to cover that next. So here we can actually see the total number of data breaches that have been notified. Now, there are more than this because not all, as you've seen, are proven to actually include personal information. And obviously you need to know that you've been breached in order to notify as well. And we certainly see some organizations that where that takes some time to become aware, if at all. But really we're seeing this fluctuate between 60 and 120 notifications per month. And you can see that at least the maximum, the peaks there is definitely in an upward trend. So the OAIC produces information as well about the actual cause of these breaches as well. So when you actually have to notify to the OAIC, and we have had to do that on a number of occasions for our clients, you basically have to have done root cause analysis and found out how it happened, what was accessed, and disclose all of that to the OAIC. And obviously you're going to be trying to make contact with your customers and potentially partners and suppliers as well to let them know. So what we see here is the total number of notifications per quarter. What roughly a third are due to human error. We saw an example of that before with the misconfigured AWS S3 bucket. Almost 2/3 are due to malicious or criminal activity, though, and we've seen the announcements by Scott Morrison in terms of that activity increasing in recent times. And unfortunately, in this tough times, one of the sectors that has been targeted more, or we've seen increases in, is actually aged care and health, which is quite disgusting, but there it is, and a small amount due to system faults as well. So what this is showing us is the actual type of personal information. Not every type is included in every breach necessarily. The largest category is definitely contact information, but shortly followed by financial details and identity information as well. Identity information is things like driver's licenses, passports, things that can effectively build 100 points of identification, which can actually potentially lead to identity theft. I think it's quite alarming as well just to see health information as well, and based on recent trends and information that we have with aged care in the health industry, I do expect that category to climb as well. So this is just showing the breakdown between the two halves in terms of what actually led to the data breach. We can see that phishing is still very, very prevalent. It's one of the main reasons. Phishing attacks, people sending links or attachments and getting people to click on those to compromise their system or their network from there. Compromised or stolen credentials, that can sometimes be linked with phishing. Sometimes phishing won't actually execute something, but it will rather take you to a page that looks legitimate. A fake LinkedIn invite or is one simple example. That they then get you to log in. You think you're logging into LinkedIn, but you're not, and you're giving your actual credentials to that. Unfortunately, a lot of people still use the same passwords for Active Directory, as well as LinkedIn, as well as Facebook, and a bunch of different things. And so there are a lot of credentials basically being shopped around on the dark web. So sometimes they don't even need to send an email. They can just get some credentials and then log in to remote access if you don't have things like multi-factor authentication. This is just a breakdown here of the actual sectors. So you can actually see health quite recently being one of the highest hit, followed by finance, education, and then legal and services. So what I've done is I've shown you, I guess, some high profile ones. You may have seen some of them. They do hit the mainstream media and the news. I've then gone through some of the statistics of the OAIC notifiable data breach reports. And I guess, I hear so what from people sometimes. You hear a lot of statistics and things like this in every cybersecurity talk you go to. And a lot of people think it won't happen to me. Okay, it's happened to somebody else. I've heard about it happen to somebody else, but it won't happen to me. So what I thought I'd do is personalize this now a little bit more and actually take you through a story that happened recently in terms of how we helped one of our clients react and respond. So an incident response is typically, we get a call. Sometimes it's a client, an existing client. Sometimes it's not. In this particular case, we'd never spoken to this company before. On the 17th of July, I actually received a personal phone call at 6 p.m. From an organization that believed that they'd suffered a ransomware attack. It was to one single server. They believed that they'd taken that server offline. They had contacted the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, or the ACSC, and they believed they had it contained. So at this point, they thought it was simply ransomware. They thought they had it under control and knew how to remediate. And our primary mission was to come and forensically analyze that machine, basically, and prove that case. So it was that same night we actually took receipt of a forensic image of the server so we could begin analysis. This does take a little bit of time, but we commenced that analysis the next day, on day 2. We provided some initial high-level findings. So we actually found out the root cause within a day, effectively, in terms of how the ransomware attack had actually got in. And really, it was a brute force attack of their remote access services. In this case, they did not have multi-factor authentication. So brute force, what that means is someone knows that my name is Aaron Bailey. They might guess that my username is A Bailey, and they just try millions of different passwords until one works. Basically, that's what a brute force attack is. Obviously, if you've only got a username and password, that can continue. It can be quite noisy. It is quite noisy. It creates a lot of alerts, but obviously someone needs to be watching. So we had figured out that that was how the attackers had gotten in. We did see ransomware execute. These are initial findings. We kept doing our forensic analysis at that point. At the same time, we actually looked at the attack surface of the organization. So we ran what's called a vulnerability assessment. We scan everything that's facing the internet. So this particular organization is a B2B organization. So dealing with other businesses, not dealing with consumers. And so effectively, we ran a vulnerability assessment to see what else are they exposed. We know remote access was attacked. We know lack of MFA is an issue, but what else is there? So we're starting to gather that information as well. We went to look into the logs. So obviously we want to see what else, if anything else happened beyond that individual one remote access server. So we went to look for logs. Now, this particular client didn't have any central logging. They didn't have what's called a SIEM, security incident or event management system. Indeed, the firewalls themselves were only logging locally, had very small storage, and we had 4 hours worth of logs. Now, by the time we were called, this client had already been running their own investigation and response for a few days. So of course, we didn't have much of the network traffic logs or system logs that we would need to go back in time to be sure of things. They also lacked EDR, endpoint detection and response, which is basically a security control you put on your servers and on your clients that can give you a lot of advanced visibility, the ability to detect, the ability to block, and the ability to respond. With tools like that, our team can actually take a forensic image of every device for deeper analysis as well. So we actually rolled some out. At the same time, we rolled out a temporary central logging system. So we're actually doing this you can imagine that change control's a little bit out the window at this point. Indeed, some of their largest clients had actually disconnected from them once they'd notified them that this was going on. So there was a lot of urgency to get this done. So we were literally rolling out controls and tools that didn't exist so that we could do the job as fast as possible. By this point, we're now providing the actual vulnerability assessment details back. So we're giving them the full details, blow by blow, per IP address, what patches are missing, what vulnerabilities are exposed to the external attack surface, so the client can go and remediate. So now we've actually finished the forensic analysis of that initial infection point. Now, what we found is, while yes, brute force, yes, through the RAS service, they were lacking MFA. What we noticed is it was far worse than ransomware. Ransomware had been executed, but there was multiple tools downloaded in order for the attackers to actually provide reconnaissance on the network. So once they're on that machine, be able to look at the rest of the network, and also a tool called Mimikatz, which we use, our penetration testers and red teams use. So white hat hackers such as us do use the tool, but black hat or bad malicious actors also use it as well. When you run Mimikatz on a system that's connected to a Windows domain, effectively you need to assume that the entire domain is compromised. Every single account, every single administrative account, every machine that's effectively connected to the domain. So at this point, on the completion of the forensic analysis, we suspect it's much worse than what we originally were told. And these tools are about persistence, about maintaining persistence in the environment and getting to as many machines as possible. So by now we've actually finished rolling out the EDR tool, so we have full visibility, and what we're actually seeing is corroborated evidence. There's multiple infections. There pretty much wasn't a system in their environment that didn't have infections. There were so many threat actors currently in the environment, and they were still under live attack. At this point, we're trying to advise them to effectively sever their company from the internet. Obviously, that didn't go down well. They didn't want to do that. So we were looking at other ways to sever the bad actors from their network and from the internet while maintaining their business operations at the same time. So now we're commencing threat hunting. We're actually looking, because we can't just cut off all communications, we actually have to hunt for bits and pieces and fight the fires that way. This is the central log collection I was talking about, in terms of we needed more visibility of logs that went over a longer period. Obviously, we advise them to roll out multi-factor authentication. It's one really important thing that if you put it on all externally facing systems, it's a really good thing to do and a good first step. It will certainly stop a brute force attack. And now we're actually giving, we're summarizing the advice basically. So not only were we needing to provide updates to the client, but to some of their larger clients as well. So we were dealing at this point with the ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre ourselves. On behalf of the client, we were talking to their clients, including their clients' legal counsels, in terms of providing updates about what was found, what was remediated, recommendations, etc. Many of the systems needed to be completely rebuilt from scratch, but there was certainly a lot of upgrades and a lot of patching going on across their Windows environment. So by this point, we've actually managed to reduce the attack surface, the external attack surface, by 86%. So a lot of that is through locking down, removing legacy systems that weren't needed, patching, remediating, rebuilding where possible. But we've now got an 86% reduction of their external attack surface. I mentioned Mimikatz before. I won't go into the technical details with the time we have today, but there are a list of very specific instructions and things you need to do to remediate when you see the detection of that tool. So we've prepared that and actually given it to the client and guided them through those remediation tasks as well at this point. So I talked about, one recommendation being sever the internet, which wasn't possible, obviously. So what we actually did is we advised them to, they are B2B, they're not open to the internet, B2C. So let's build a whitelist. Let's build a list of the clients we know you have and only allow those connections. So rather than try to block the bad stuff, let's just look for what we know are your clients and trust that. So effectively cut you off from the rest of the internet except for your clients. So we actually built this list and guided them to apply that on their security systems. By this point, the client's actually confirmed that they've completed the Mimikatz. You can see it's 1:27 a.m., a lot of late nights, a lot of round the clock working at this point. The client's also confirmed that they've put the whitelist on. So at this point, we're looking a lot better. We've actually almost cut them off from the internet, certainly from anything excluding what we know is good. And we've also performed all the remediation to effectively try and get to the point where the domain itself is safe and the credentials are safe. There's been multiple rotations of passwords. So obviously, if you suspect that all of the credentials in an environment are actually compromised, you need to rotate those passwords. So we actually did a couple of runs of those, and we actually then moved the EDR tool. Up until now, it's only in monitor mode, so it was only giving us intel and telemetry, but it wasn't blocking anything. So at this point, we actually block. So now we've got effectively severing bad traffic from the internet with the client whitelist, second last. And then when we switch the EDR to blocking mode, we're severing the bad actions or activities that are operating on those servers and clients. So now there was just a few endpoints that took a little bit longer to get to. So by now we're at 100% coverage of all endpoints in blocking mode. And we confirm that there's no new blocked events or alerts that have been detected since we moved to blocking mode. and then we deliver the final report to the client that in multiple formats, one deep dive technical detail for them and one executive report that they can actually give to their B2B clients as well. And longer term, obviously, we're giving them advice on what to do to continue. Obviously, we've stemmed the bleeding. We've performed a rapid operation effectively on the patient, but there's still more to be done. So we've obviously given advice on what to do ongoing as well. So some of the key learnings, I guess, from this timeline, from this story, in this case, initial call to final report in 10 days. I'm incredibly proud of that. It might sound like a long time, certainly for a business to be in disarray like this, but given the severity of infection across almost every system, that's actually a phenomenally quick turnaround. So you need to know who to call and how to enact an incident response. Effort, there was a lot of effort put in from not only our team but the client as well. There's a lot of sleepless nights. We do run a 24/7 operation with shifts, so we can hand over to people. We have multiple people from our team, but obviously we can't do everything in a client environment. They do have their own IT team that we're working around the clock as well. Lack of logs was a big lesson to be learned from this. Obviously, the first step is visibility. If you want to know what's going on and what to do about it, you need logs first. So central logging was a key learning as well. And the essential 8. So I talked about multi-factor authentication, or MFA. The essential 8 is really a list of 8 things that you should look to do. It's released by the Australian Signals Directorate, Australian government, part of the Department of Defence, and really it's patching, it's vulnerability management, it's MFA, having backups of systems. It's really the basics, but if we see them done well and done regularly within clients, it makes them far more resilient. So how do we help clients to better detect, prevent, and respond to incidents like this? So we have a pretty simple process of assess, improve, and manage. We leverage this process across all 3 divisions of our business: infrastructure, security, and automation. Just to go into it quickly for security, what this really means is we have a consulting catalog of offerings. We have different skilled people that do these different things. If you're in the assess phase, it would typically be an architect or a consultant from our side that would help you, depending on if it's a penetration test or a risk assessment. Policies and procedures, etc. Improve is either reconfiguring or improving security controls you already have, or including new ones that you don't. And we have architects or engineers that do that and design and integrate it into your environment. And then manage, we have a 24/7 shift rotated SOC, Security Operations Center, where we can manage things that clients already have, but also things that we provide for clients as well. One way that we do an assessment for a client is our own security maturity framework. There's a lot here, so I won't go through them all individually, but suffice to say there's 7 domains or capabilities. There's 4 levels of maturity, and really this is our attempt to try and provide you with the information and the, I guess, imagery that you need to have board level conversations in terms of where you are. We can provide a current state across all of these with over 100 questions with an assessment. Not all clients want to be a level 3 or a 4, depending on the industry and the type of business you're in. The clients will tell us what their target state is, and it doesn't need to be linear. It could be a 4 on one capability and a 1 on another. But once we know that, we can provide a roadmap for remediation for a cybersecurity program, looking at products, projects, and managed services. Whether we do it or not, these are the sorts of things that need to be done to get to a future state. So this is, we can split it in multiple phases. This is showing phase 1, in this case 12 months. We've seen them in 6 months sprints, 12 months, and 3 and 5 year roadmaps as well. But we can show you what will happen if you implement these things and actually increase your maturity across all of these different capabilities. Just lastly, just to cover some of the clients that work with us today for security managed services and SOC services. We work with lots of different clients across lots of different sectors. Here's just some for retail, financial services, energy and operational technology, or OT environments, which have a bunch of special use cases and skills and technologies required. Government as well. Legal and healthcare and education. And obviously, I guess I'm conscious that I've told you how great we are a little bit, but you don't need to take my word for it. We have plenty of clients that we work with that are happy to have a talk to you as well, and provide testimonials for different levels of services that we provide. So that's it. If you're keen to talk more with us, you can obviously, we partner with HLB, so you can go through HLB, or there's our contact details for me personally, as well as our website as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. That was very comprehensive. Look, something that came to my mind as you were stepping through that example of a real-world attack, and see the timeline there, that's obviously happened during this sort of COVID pandemic as well. So the organisation was probably facing other challenges as well as then a cyber attack on top of that. And from some of the data I glimpsed there, that may have been quite a reasonable sized organisation with some reasonable capabilities already internally in their IT department. How would you see a similar event play out in a medium-sized private business? Do they face the same challenges, and would a response pattern potentially be similar?
Yeah, so the challenges really are there regardless of whether or not the organization has 20 staff, 50 staff, or sometimes even 50,000 staff. Really, it's about testing it. So you need some basic controls. We mentioned a couple. Central logging. Ideally, you've got multi-factor authentication on all external things. Ideally, you're patching quite regularly and frequently. So there's three basic things that everyone should do, and not everyone does at all or as well as they should. But really, you can test these things. You can do a red team or an incident response tabletop scenario, even without doing it technically. You can run through a theoretical scenario. So really, it's about, you're not going to know the gaps. It's better to know the gaps you have and fix some of them before it's a real scenario, when it's in a practice run, before it's live fire, for sure.
A couple of questions that we've received here, and one is, what can organisations do to minimise the human error risks for malicious attacks?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, human error can be a number of things. It can be obviously your own internal IT team, or even outsourcers misconfiguring something, exposing something to the internet that shouldn't be, like we saw with the Amazon S3 bucket. It can be just people clicking on a link, right? So obviously all staff members are receiving emails. Phishing is one of the biggest avenues. So really, validation and security awareness training are the two main ways that you can try and prevent or mitigate human error. So validation is really, do things like vulnerability assessments, do things like penetration tests, get your business, not just externally, but internally as well, actually tested, because that will uncover problems, not just patching issues, but if something's been misconfigured or someone's accidentally done something that they shouldn't have, you'll uncover it before the malicious actors or the bad guys or girls do. For clicking on links, security awareness training, we've done that from board level briefings to pre-COVID in-person presentations where everyone comes into a boardroom and we talk them about how to hover the mouse over a link to see where it's going before you click it. Some really, really basic things like that. Passwords, password hygiene, don't use the same one everywhere. Use things like password managers to randomize that and make it so you don't have to write them down or forget them, etc. But really, where it's going now is digital security awareness training. So there are tools, there are products that can actually send out phishing emails to your entire organization. And then you get reporting. You know who's clicked. Most importantly, you know who's reported it. And it's as important to focus on the positive metrics as the negative, right? You really want to have a culture where people don't feel silly by forwarding an email to the support team or whoever to say, I don't think this looks legitimate. It's better to report something and support team or us or anybody to come back and say, no, that one's okay, that's a real one, than to obviously the alternative and think it's okay and click on it. So running those sorts of things regularly will give you some of those key metrics. Who are the clickers? Who are the reporters, and what are those sort of percentages?
I've got a number of questions here that I may just pose to now our panellists. Aaron, just in terms of the case study you presented, how prepared did that organisation think they were, and what was the size of that organisation?
Yeah, so I think I said at the start, and I need to be a bit careful here, obviously, because we want to be sensitive about our clients as we would for you all. So I'm going to put them in a range and say that they were between 200 and 1,000 staff, rather than give you an exact staff count, but that kind of gives you, they're kind of larger SMB to smaller mid-market, I guess, in terms of the segmentation. At the start of the engagement, I think they thought they had it under control. So they had figured out that there was a ransomware attack and they had been able to take that server offline. But I guess they were lacking a few key things that gave them the visibility to know that it had gone a lot further. Very few companies, certainly under sort of 1,000, 2,000 staff, know much about Mimikatz, for example. Even if they saw it and that it was running, wouldn't necessarily know what it meant.
Yeah, okay. And Nicholas, our business has suffered during the COVID pandemic with no certainty as to if or when it may revert to business as usual. We know we may change our business model, but how do we start that process?
That's not an uncommon situation to what we've been engaging and talking with to a number of our clients about. We suggest that the starting point is engagement with key stakeholders, from your board, potentially the owners of the business if it's privately held business, through to the management team across the organisation. It really does need to be organisation-wide discussions. It will involve, I guess, the marketing business development teams to understand what are the opportunities for your products and services in the environment going forward. Your operations teams in understanding if you need to go through a reorganisation, what are the opportunities to redeploy and maybe reutilise your assembled assets and so forth internally, and then conducting this diagnostic. Now, we have been doing this in a workshop format, when time is not necessary of immediate essence. There's a process which can do this over a longer period of time, but we found it very effective to get some workshops, whether it be sort of a number of couple-hour sessions where you get people in the room, potentially an external facilitator, and run through and explore what are some of the key risks and opportunities for the business. Now, some things may not be drastic at all, and it's maybe bringing to market sooner some product or a delivery method, and maybe less of a hurdle than it needs to be. But engagement with those stakeholders and having something like a workshop, which then will form the basis for your strategic plan. And I'll just reiterate my point that needs to be coupled with having some good quality financial data and understanding I guess where the business organisation sits in terms of its revenues, cash flows, and cost base, and having that timely.
Thank you, Nick. Aaron, there seems to be a bit of a common theme in terms of these questions today as to the size of organisation and the number of employees. So, are cybersecurity attacks really only a risk for larger organisations? If we have under 50 employees and over 2, should we be concerned, and what is the real risk to us?
Yeah, sure. So there are, we have clients of all shapes and sizes. Just so you know, I think like Plus Fitness, I think was one of the logos on there. That they're a franchise. So while they're a larger organization, each individual gymnasium effectively is we've got many of those that are clients, and each of them are they're like 5 to 10 staff members. And similarly we've got some smaller clients in SMB as well. So we've got a range of different vendors and things that we can work with. There are things that you can just do without, password managers. Many of them, I use LastPass. It's free. If you don't have it, download it, like the free version. There is a commercial version, but getting all of your 50 staff to download and use LastPass to change passwords and have them unique between Facebook, LinkedIn, and your corporate login is one great first step. That's just effort. It's free. You don't pay a single cent to do it. So there's definitely ways to make yourself more secure and more security minded, regardless of size. Now, in terms of how attackable are they, or how much under attack are they? It really does vary. We have seen smaller organizations have issues as well, but it depends on your business, right? And the data that you hold. So if you're doing credit card transactions or processing and you haven't done that in a particularly secure way or outsourced that, obviously that's information people, hackers want credit cards. That's important. So the type of data you hold should determine how much you do about it. If you're holding things like passports or driver's license or things like that. If you're only holding, a CRM, a client relationship management database with names and mobiles and emails, perhaps, and that's really the only sort of data you have, certainly I think the risk is lower. But then you need to think about who are your clients. So we've seen attacks before, like the Target attack in the US. They were actually compromised through their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. So HVAC. So that was a rather small company, which was less than 100 staff. That they maintain HVAC within the organization, and they were attacked not because they were a target for Target, but they were a pivot point to get to Target as the larger thing. So if you have larger clients or clients with more sensitive data, like some of the things I've mentioned before, then you could be just a pivot point or a pathway to get to the ultimate goal. And indeed, the timeline that I talked through before was that exact scenario. The client themselves, our client, didn't hold much sensitive information themselves, but they were connected to some rather large organizations that did. So in their particular case, they were attacked because they were a pathway to a goal.
Thank you. And Nicholas, during COVID-19, everyone is so busy. So responding, that busyness, in terms of responding to daily challenges of running an organisation, how do we give them the time to update their strategic plan? What are the tools that we can provide to them?
Look, again, not an uncommon challenge. The conversation we flip to is, what's the risk if we don't invest the time to do this? Yes, we may make it through the next 13-week cycle. We may make it through to the next quarter. But what's our business going to look like in 12 months or 24 months? So it is really challenging. Again, it's similar to my response to the previous point. It's not any one individual's responsibility. We found that the process can be quite efficient by trying to get the key stakeholders out of the business for 3 hours, half a day, invest in that workshop. Documenting the strategy doesn't need to be in long form. It can start by capturing in bullet points and generally just getting alignment from the key stakeholders around the direction an organisation needs to take, and then from that having an actionable work program to really mitigate those initial and key risks, but be able to invest the time and effort that's needed to on the longer term. So no, there's definitely no silver bullet there, but I think it's just such a highly critical step that needs to be taken, that I really do encourage all organisations, if they haven't had a strategic planning session with you recently, to engage and do that. If necessary, getting in an external facilitator to assist with that process, again, may not be costly, but can be hugely beneficial, both in time and the value of the output.
We've run out of time. We've reached our 11 o'clock mark. There are a number of questions that remain unanswered, and we will take those offline and we will answer those questions for you. Today, I'd really like to thank our guest presenters, Aaron Bailey and Nicholas Guest. Our recording of the session and the slides will be made available to you shortly. I hope you found this session to be of value and informative. And I'd like to just put up a polling question there. If you would like HLB Mann Judd or the missing link to contact you, please just complete either the yes or no. Again, thank you very much, and stay safe and well, everyone. Thank you.